Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ABH's podcast, Making a Difference in Mental Health. I am your host, Danielle Young, and I have my co-host here with me. Hey, co-host.
Hey, I'm Wendy. Good to be back with you, Danielle. Wow, we've gotten through a whole month of podcasting. Our very first episodes are complete.
We deserve an applause. Oh my goodness. I am so happy that we made it through our first month, but also I have just enjoyed this entire series for our Men's Mental Health Month. What about you?
I think it was the best series we could have come up with, right? Letting our listeners know men's mental health is just as important as women's mental health and everybody else's. And so it was nice to have a feature of clinicians joining us at the table to talk about things around mental health and celebrating fatherhood. It was so interesting and fascinating to hear all their perspectives around fatherhood, and I hope the audience found something to take away from that.
Absolutely. So our first guest was Jamel Davis, and he gave us a lot to think about. He talked about a lot of different topics surrounding his own journey through mental health and surrounding his own journey about the vulnerability that we talked about, debunking even the stigma of men or Black men even not really being able to tap into their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, and again, just kind of debunking those stereotypes of who Black men are in society and what they look like. And so what are some of the things that you took away specifically from Jamel's interview?
I totally agree with you, Danielle. I think the most important thing I took away from Jamel is exposure. He used that word, that keyword exposure, and he talked about how growing up in his own family, how it was important for his parents to expose him to different cultures. So that when that happens, what do you think happens? You find out you have more in common than differences. Growing up, learning the culture, the food, the community, et cetera, and being accepted. So I think his experience translated into how he is as a clinician and also how he is as a father. So the exposure piece for me was huge.
Right. Some of the things that I took away specifically from Jamel, when he was kind of discussing his upbringing and him, as you said, being exposed, or his parents allowing him to be exposed to different cultures, to different people who don't look like him, who don't talk like him, definitely not where he was from. I believe he said something like he would have to take either 2 buses, or maybe his experiences were 2 cities or 2 towns or somewhere different from where he was. And being able to play. Yeah, I'm sure we have some listeners from Baltimore too. And we know that at any given place, where even you have the beautiful cities, 2 blocks up, 3 blocks over,
absolutely,
the look of the city is completely different. The culture of the city is completely different. So one specific thing that stood out to me for Jamel was when he spoke of his ability to be able to be exposed to different things because his parents allowed him to, whether it was different cultures, different people, as you said, different food, different sports, and then also comparing his exposure or his development of certain experiences to a friend who has pretty much stayed local to the culture of his Baltimore hometown, and how there is a complete difference, even though they both have had the opportunity to step outside of the culture. There's one friend who pretty much stays, whether it be because of comfort or because there is no desire to be exposed later on in life. You know, we weigh in the balance. What's the benefit of being exposed to something new and broadening your horizons and broadening your thought process and broadening your experiences, or staying where you're comfortable? And that's really something that stood out to me.
Right. And how he translated that to his parenting with his own family and his own children, and being very open to the friends that they have, at the same time trying to navigate that line between, I may have a friend who doesn't look like me, but can I do the things that person can do because of being African American? So I love the fact that he is so open with his kids and able to have those kinds of conversations, you know, the talk, and take it to least another level of, really explaining why that talk is important, but also explaining, again, the importance of exposure and getting out there and meeting different people.
Right. And, one thing that stands out to me is that specific story. You remember the story that Jamal told about his sons?
Absolutely. They were playing the game.
Right. And this is the importance of that talk that you were saying, is that for his sons, for our listeners, Jamal told a story, and I really encourage you to go back and listen to his episode, but he did tell a story about his sons wanting to play a specific game, and the area that he lives is a majority white or Caucasian area, and for his sons to play with his friends, and his sons are the minority within that community. And the specific game dealt with, I guess, running around and playing at night or dusk. And for me, as a Black woman listening to him talk about this, I begin to think about, oh my goodness, what ifs, considering all the things that we have seen from a racial perspective over the last year when it comes to
Absolutely.
Black men and Black children. And so for him to have to really talk to his sons who may not quite understand the ramifications of what possibly could happen if they were to run around playing in the dark, with their white friends and, counterparts, what possibly could have happened. That really stood out for me. And my goodness,
Right.
I think we even took the conversation a little bit offline as well.
That stood out for me, but it also reminded me and gave me some hope that children are so innocent.
Yeah.
They had no idea, his children or his children's friend, about the what ifs. The what ifs. What could happen? How is this going to be interpreted or looked at or seen in their community? So it gives me hope that we are going to do a better job of raising our kids and really teaching them that there's really not so much of a difference between cultures. So that's the last piece that stood out for me. But when he was telling that story, Danielle, I was so, I took a breath. I was worried about his children and what that outcome was going to be at the end of that story. But I'm glad, he was demonstrating the need to have the talk to his children to keep them safe and protected, because although the kids are innocent, the adults are not, unfortunately.
Right, absolutely. And then you know what? I think too, Jamal's way of approaching his sons. Now, I don't know if it has to do with because he's a father that he's a really good therapist, or because he's a therapist, he can lend certain skills that he's learned as a therapist to have those harder conversations with his son. But this really shows how he is able to incorporate some of his life lessons learned, some of the people that he's either worked with or grew up with from one type of neighborhood translating into a completely different neighborhood, as he also discussed where he lives. And then being able to carry some of that over into just being a clinician and being a therapist. I think that we can see that evident even through the conversation that we had with Jamal.
Right. I think he's a strong clinician because of his experiences and how he's able to bring that to the surface and work with his clients. So that's impressive. It was a very good interview.
I absolutely enjoyed Jamal's interview. And then, Wendy, we had another phenomenal episode where we invited 4 special guests about fatherhood. The episode was about fatherhood and the impact that it has had on their lives. And so let's talk about that, because I truly, truly enjoyed what all of these men had to offer in that episode on fatherhood.
So Danielle, it was a very interesting group. We've had men, young men, older men, talking about their experiences relating to fatherhood. And I just love the different ideas that came out of that conversation, the sharing of information between each other. And we had a panel member, a mentor, Jonathan, who is becoming a father and grew up without a father. And we have an older gentleman, Raymond, who grew up without a father as well. And their perspectives were so interesting in terms of that and what fatherhood meant to them. And I think the whole question about vulnerability that we asked them, and how they expounded on that in terms of their experience raising children and the need to be vulnerable and debunking a myth. It's not bad to be vulnerable if you're a man. So I just found it very, very interesting, very, very helpful. Hopefully our listeners did. What other things did you find from that interview, Danielle?
So Wendy, with that interview, because there were so many different perspectives from the gentleman, I had to take notes. And so, of course, you already spoke about the vulnerability and the strengths, and some of the men who had been dads for a little bit longer. Of course, we have soon-to-be dads. We have dads who have been dads for maybe just a few years. And then, of course, with Raymond and Daryl, they're seasoned dads. And I think Daryl's even a grandpa. So he's taking a trip into grandfatherhood. But they really talked about the differences in approaches to parenting, and they talked about teachable moments and lessons. I believe they're girl dads. I think Kobe Bryant coined that phrase, girl dads. They talked about that. There was a really funny moment between Raymond and Daryl. But to go back really quickly to what you were talking about with Jonathan and Raymond, they were very vulnerable and transparent with talking about not having a father in the home, and their moms championing the women, and they talked about the desire of what they wanted to be as a father, and they had this thought in their mind, and I think all the men did. They had this thought in their mind of what fatherhood would look like and who they're going to be, but then it wasn't until their child or children were born that their fatherhood was shaped because of who their children were. And I found that to be quite touching, and an eye opener, because you think you can plan out, from the guys. I would think that guys plan out certain things, and then they come around and they have a baby girl or they have a little boy, and their personalities and their feelings and emotions are shifted and shaped and changed into who they are as fathers. Mm-hmm.
Right, especially with all of the panel members talking about having daughters. And having a daughter was it. It changed everything in a different way that having a son would do. And I feel like they really were absolutely vulnerable about that, and talking about, I want to be the best father that I can be, the best role model to my daughter. I want to protect her, raise her right, and such focus and passion about doing a job with their kids.
Yeah. And they even took it a step further at times in saying, I was scared. When I first heard I'm going to be a dad, they talked about a little bit of fear setting in, and like, oh my goodness, who am I going to be? What is it going to look like? And then when their little one comes, they're learning along the way with them. I just, like I said, there were a couple of funny moments. And let me tell you, even though all of the men come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, I kept seeing head shakes. I kept seeing thumbs up. Like, they were really connecting and bonding and identifying with one another. And I really, truly enjoyed that as well.
I did. I hope our audience members did too. Enjoyed listening to men talk about tough stuff that we women talk about all the time. And it's nice to hear men think about it, men talk about it, and they're comfortable in sharing the tips on fatherhood to other men.
Yeah. I want to go back, and I kind of want to just apply this to everyone, whether it's with Jamel or whether it's with the panel of gentlemen that we had. I myself will never have the male experience, just in general. I'll never have the Black male experience. So I don't know what it's like to have to go through the world and have, certain societal standards placed upon you to be strong, to be stoic, to have to be the protector and to be the provider. And
don't cry.
Don't cry, like boys don't cry, all of these stereotypes that we want to debunk here, on our podcast. But all of the men kind of talked to that and spoke to that. And, they discussed their fears, and they even discussed, there was this long discussion about whether vulnerability is a strength. And I personally think that it sometimes is much more courageous for you to be open and to be transparent, like the gentlemen were on the panel that we had about fatherhood.
Right. I think they would agree with you. I remember that part of the conversation, and I'm glad we had that, because that's a myth that we are debunking, that you're weak and you're fragile if you cry or show vulnerability. And they're really saying absolutely not. You're strong if you can do it.
Yeah.
And pushing your household forward and helping your kids, it's all strength in that. And so I'm glad that they spoke to that.
Absolutely. And then rounding out the conversation, and I'm really glad that we asked them about what kind of advice would they give to encourage fathers. So I'm just going to go over a list of things that they said, and then we're going to round it out with probably one of our favorite parts, or maybe even one of your favorite parts. They talked about being patient and understanding through the journey of parenthood and fatherhood. They talked about even being accountable for your part in your position that you play when raising a child or children. They encourage communication with their partner or with their wives. Daryl mentioned something, and I think all the gentlemen also agreed, to have a positive, motivating male figure in your life. So whether that was their dad who they grew up with, or someone
Absolutely.
who along the way they connected with, even Jonathan and even Mark were talking about how they were taking in the advice, or they had used one of the, I think it was Mark and Raymond, that's a mentorship type of relationship when it comes to fatherhood.
And Jonathan pointed out using, I think, a relative, his uncle or somebody that was guiding him and getting him prepared for fatherhood.
Right.
So absolutely good message there to find that person. Find that person. So for me as a mom, I was very happy to hear the importance of shouting out mothers and shouting out your partner and taking care of your partner, and the acknowledgement that moms do have a lot to do in the family in terms of taking care of the kids, running the household, even running the men. It's a lot.
They some of the guys talked about, I guess some of the mood swings that women go through, and making sure that you listen to everything she says and rub her feet at the end of the day.
Exactly. I love that. Rub her feet at the end of the day. That was precious.
But there was definitely our favorite part was just the acknowledgement of how much work and effort it does take, and how much women, their wives, their partners do when it comes to parenting, and when it comes to being a mommy, and when it comes to taking care of these kids and taking care of them at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think rounding that out, I do want to emphasize something Raymond said too, which is anyone can really be a father, but a parent is super hard. That's the work, that's actual work that's getting done to raise your child, is being there, having those conversations, spending the time, teaching. I think Daryl stressed the importance of teaching your children certain things. And so I do love that parenting, it's important.
Absolutely. And then I think the last thing that I wrote down with the exclamation point was that they said, at the end of the day, enjoy yourself. So they were encouraging fathers, enjoy your children, enjoy yourself as you raise this little one who maybe looks like you, acts like you, looks like mom, acts like mom, but just enjoy the journey.
Absolutely.
So this is the end of our Men's Mental Health Month. Wendy, again, we did it. Woohoo!
We made it a full month.
Yes, we had phenomenal episodes and interviews. And I just, again, want to give hats off and kudos to all the men who joined this particular series, that were vulnerable, that were open, that gave advice, and that dropped some gems for all of our listeners. We hope that you enjoyed this show. And Wendy, next month, July, is self-care. Let our listeners know what we have in store for them for the month of July for self-care.
Well, Danielle, summertime is my time, right? And so it's all about self-care. What are we going to do to take care of ourselves? We've been quarantined for over a year, And now the world is opening. People are getting vaccinated. People are getting out, going on trips, dining again, and staying outside. So exercising and self-care is so important. So we're going to begin the month talking to our medical director about medication and self-care, and how medication is important through the therapeutic process, and how we want our listeners to look at therapy and medication in a different lens, that it's a good thing. It's part of self-care. Then we're going to bring in a special guest to talk about exercising and yoga, the movement coach that's going to come in and tell us what we can do on our own and throughout the day to self-care. And then finally, we're going to round out the month with our CEO. What does our CEO do to self-care as she's running our company? And how important is it for her employees to self-care as well? So a lot of good tips. July is a fun month. 4th of July is coming up, and there are going to be lots of barbecues and pool parties. Everybody's relaxing, and remember what I told you I like to do to relax is have that wine, have that chit chat with my friends. So self-care is absolutely important, and I'm excited that our guests are going to come and talk to us and hopefully share some good tips with our audience.
All right, wonderful, everybody. So remember to tune in for July, our self-care month. This is Danielle Young with Advanced Behavioral Health Podcast. I have my co-host here with me, Wendy Grier. We're always striving to make a difference in mental health, and we will see you all next time. Bye.